views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Good evening and welcome to the Bronx Buzz. This is BronxNet's program where we talk to reporters and editors and filmmakers and videographers and really anybody who's putting something out in the Bronx. And this evening we're going to start off with a reporter, and the second part of it is with actually the director of a well-known Bronx organization that has a video out about a very topical issue that you're going to want to hear about and stay with us for. But right now, it's my pleasure to welcome back to the Bronx Buzz. It is David Brand from City Limits, a staff reporter, newly named staff reporter at City Limits. So nice to have you with us, David. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me back on the show.
So as you know, what caught my eye was your article, Will New York Make Good on Pledge to Convert Hotels into Affordable Homes? One of the things I thought of and still think about, we've got all those buildings in Manhattan on Park Avenue. And, you know, if I ran a company, I'd say, gee, we've kind of been surviving with everybody working at home. Maybe I'll have some office space, but I'm going to get rid of the office space. In addition, who knows when people will travel and really fill up New York hotels again. And so maybe this is an opportunity for housing. So why don't you just rewind a little bit, talk about the Housing Our Neighbors with Dignity Act called HONDA, and tell us where the legislation is in the state, and then let's just break it down and see what the possibilities are.
Well, it's exactly what you said, Gary. There is an opportunity right now to purchase these unused or underused hotels or distressed buildings, distressed commercial properties where businesses have closed, people are working from home, racking up huge rent bills, mortgages. And so this is an opportunity advocates and lawmakers and even people in the real estate and hotel industry say to sell those buildings to nonprofit developers who can convert them into affordable and or supportive housing. And so the state legislature and Governor Cuomo set aside $100 million for that purpose. This $100 million would be used for converting distressed properties, commercial hotels into permanent housing. But they didn't set up a mechanism for releasing that money until just the end of the legislative session. As you said, the Housing Our Neighbors with Dignity Act, or HONDA, is a way to unlock that money, $100 million, and fund the creation of permanent housing with some kind of key stipulations. All of the housing that is created with that funding has to set aside 50% of units for people who have experienced homelessness. So that means they're moving out of shelters into permanent housing, or for people who are making a certain percentage of area median income, less than, I think, 80% of AMI. And so rather than saying, you know, we hear all the time about affordable housing, which who is it really affordable to? Maybe more middle income people. This is going to be truly affordable housing was set aside for people experiencing homelessness. The one issue, $100 million doesn't get you that far.
That was going to be my first question. I was like, listen, I know $100 million may buy you a second baseman, but I don't know that $100 million is going to buy you a lot of housing.
Right, that's the thing. So in New York City commercial real estate, $100 million doesn't buy that much. And as a general rule, nonprofit developers say that to convert a hotel or some other building into supportive housing specifically costs like $500,000 a unit. So $100 million can get you 200 units. It's really a drop in the bucket. But supporters of this legislation, the lawmakers who sponsored it, who backed it, the developers, the nonprofit developers, and the advocates say this is just a start. This now creates this mechanism. We can get more funding, continue funding from the state, get more from the federal government to house homeless New Yorkers. And it also gets state lawmakers more involved in setting capital funding policy when it comes to housing.
I guess we should establish, as I understand it, and you would know better than I do. It passed in the Senate, it passed in the Assembly, and now it's waiting for the governor's signature. My
Right.
sense is that the governor has indicated that he would sign it, but of course, let's get Andrew Cuomo to actually sign it, right? Do I
Right. No, it's
have this
exactly
characterized?
that's exactly right. And I think we could now we can be in the phase of getting ready to hear advocates and other lawmakers saying, all right, let's get this signed so we can get it put it into effect. But Cuomo has been talking about this ever since his State of the State address, where he specifically mentioned uh, funding the creation of affordable housing out of these hotels or out of these distressed commercial properties. So that's been the thing this entire time. The hotel industry supports it. The real estate industry, REBNY, the Real Estate Board of New York, the most progressive left-leaning lawmakers in New York, people experiencing homelessness. So the general idea has widespread support. It took a while to get to this final piece of legislation. And yeah, as you said, now it's up
Yeah.
to Cuomo to sign it.
Well, I'm going to make a horrible political statement now. Very often the governor only wants to do it when it becomes his legislation.
Wow.
And so that he's going to, my guess is he'll come up with a wrinkle and say, get this done, and then I'll sign it. But we'll wait and see. I view that $100 million as kind of seed money to kind of prove that it works. You say, well, wait a minute, 200 units, that's actually pretty good. That's 200 people who could have a place to live. On the other hand, when you have between 60 and 80,000 people in the home shelter system, 200 units, as you said, is a drop in the bucket. I want to ask just about the expanse of New York and what I talked about. You've got office buildings that are just not going to be filled up, and I don't know how many companies have ended their leases or said we're not coming back, or when their lease expires. We don't know those numbers. Is this a good model to use to maybe look at some of those Park Avenue buildings? I guess converting office buildings may not be as easy as hotels, which have, rooms set aside for beds, and you can have kitchens and bathrooms. What are your thoughts? Am I just dreaming, or is this a possible next step?
I don't think you're just dreaming. I mean, I think if you're dreaming, so are a lot of people, because I think that's a lot of people have had that idea, especially over the past 16 months or so. This specific legislation would make that tough because you can only convert properties in areas zoned specifically for residential use, and that was kind of one of the hangups coming into the very end of negotiations, where they cut off this whole section where you'd be able to convert hotels as of right in manufacturing zones or commercial zones. So the zoning, the land use component of it gets a little tricky. That's something that the city, though, they could pass a law of their own saying, well, if you have a building, you want to convert it for specifically affordable housing, and even more specifically affordable housing for people experiencing homelessness. We'll make that easy for you. We're going to bypass land use.
What's interesting about that? There's a big movement, of course, of toward upzoning in some places.
Yeah.
Now we're talking about down zoning. That is a fascinating concept. We'll see how far it could go. Now, as I understand, which is really from your writing, at the Jehovah Witnesses Hotel, this has been done. That I'm unfamiliar with the project. Of course, it's outside the the borders of the Bronx.
It's in Brooklyn,
so, yeah. Is that a successful project? Is that a successful model? Was that done in this era, in this post-pandemic thing, or is that part of some? In other words, where does that fit to say this will work, or we're not sure? I mean, how do you view that?
Yeah, right. The organization Breaking Ground bought what used to be a hotel owned by the Jehovah's Witnesses, pretty big building, almost 500 units. And they broke ground, the organization Breaking Ground broke ground in November 2020 on this conversion to turn it into affordable housing with supportive housing, incorporated there too. So this model has been around. And I could say personally, I've worked in supportive housing in buildings that were once SRO hotels throughout the city, especially Northern Manhattan and South Bronx. This is different because it puts like very strict stipulations on the specific set-asides. First of all, the specific funding source, or part of the funding source, because the funding comes from a lot of places, and the specific amount of apartments that have to be set aside for people who are homeless, and who are making a specific, income cap.
Yeah,
So,
I was going to say with a ceiling on the amount they could
yeah.
make. I thought it was interesting. Two things I want to mention. Number one, that it gets the state involved in the capital funding of New York City housing. I actually happen to live in a Mitchell Lama
Nice.
project, so I know that the state can be involved. I don't even know where I'm going with the question. I just think it's an interesting thing. We certainly hope the state HPD manages what they say they're supposed to manage, if that's part of what this program is. So
Yeah, the supporters of the bill said it has that kind of other effect, like you mentioned, $100 million, not that much money, but it's seed money. It creates this function, but it also gets state lawmakers or state legislators in particular more involved in capital policy, when that had been mostly the domain of Governor Cuomo and his administration. Right. And so this is getting state lawmakers in the Assembly and Senate who have been so active on tenants' rights legislation, on legislation to keep people housed. This will get them more involved, they say, in legislation to create housing to house people who are experiencing homelessness.
We're here with David Brand, staff reporter at City Limits, and he's written about the potential of converting hotels to housing. I thought one of the comments, I hadn't thought of this, one of the comments on your article on City Limits, somebody was concerned about small landlords who are trying to do the right thing, and they're, trying, maybe and believe me, it's a struggle to create the kind of housing that could be affordable. And they're saying, wait a minute, you're doing this, and you're basically giving all our contracts to the bigger guys again. We're getting left out. Do you have any thoughts about that? I just thought it was an interesting perspective that I had not thought of.
Yeah, I guess one thought on that is that another piece of legislation that the state Assembly and Senate just passed, and kind of a surprise even to advocates, was they raised the cap for state housing vouchers, known as state FEPs, to the same level as Section 8, which is set by what the federal government sets as fair market rent. The city did that only a few weeks ago. And so there was this bill in the state legislature to raise the value of their vouchers as well. And it actually passed. And so if Cuomo signs that into law, that means landlords can earn even more by taking in tenants who have these housing vouchers, which guarantee rent. They're issued by the city or the state, especially to people experiencing homelessness. A lot of landlords have been reluctant to take them because, well, two reasons. First, there's source of income discrimination. You gotta be quick,
Dave. We're almost out of time, so get to it.
Reluctant to take them because they don't match fair market rent. They can make more money by just getting people who are paying cash. And so this raises the value. They have more opportunity.
Wow. Fascinating. David Brand, thank you. This is an absolutely fascinating dialogue about a core issue in the Bronx and throughout the city, and your work at City Limits energizes us all. So thank you so much. Say best regards to Jean Marie and all my buddies over there, and I'm sure we'll have you back here on the program. Thank you so much. David Brand, staff reporter at City Limits.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about, should your geography dictate your biography? That's what we're going to talk about. Don't go away.